Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Haiphong. We have a big show for you today, so be sure to hit that like button as you come on. This is a breaking and evolving development where the United States, this is a quote, the United States that ignited the war will bear responsibility for the extremely dire consequences of its aggression, end quote. That was a foreign minister, Abbas Arachi, commenting on the Trump authorization of the bombing that happened in the early hours of June 22nd of Iran's nuclear sites, where 125 military aircraft and 7 B-2 bombers were sent to drop bunker busters on Iran in a historic escalation with the potential to spiral into all-out war. Yet despite the boasting of Donald Trump of a spectacular military success, the truth is far more murky. Donald Trump said Israel is safer now, but Operation True Promise 3 has been in full effect directly after the strike. While much is yet to be verified about the U.S.'s strikes here, sources are suggesting that they may not only have been completely ineffective, but also have opened up a Pandora's box of a war that the U.S. simply cannot win. So joining me today to discuss all of this and more is Professor Mohammad Marandi, joining from the country that was just bombed hours ago. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
It's always a pleasure.
Of course, of course. Please hit that like button, everyone, so we boost this in YouTube's algorithm. So
everyone hit that like button. Danny deserves it.
Thanks so much, Professor. Thanks so much. All right. So let us get started here. Okay. I wanted to ask you, Professor Marandi, your impressions of these strikes. We have Donald Trump boasting, Pete Hegseth boasting, Sean Hannity boasting that Iran's nuclear sites are completely destroyed. Yet we have several Iranian lawmakers saying the opposite. Manan Raisi, a lawmaker in the city of Qum, said this: despite the lies of America's deceitful president, critical infrastructure remains intact. What was hit was mostly on the ground and completely restorable. Professor Marandi, what's your impression? What's the mood in Iran right now directly after this attack?
You know, Danny, there are lots of things that can be said. And first of all, if they've destroyed the nuclear program, then they can now end the hostility towards Iran. They have no more concerns anymore. So, people in Israel or occupied Palestine will start asking Netanyahu, then why is Iran still bombing us? Let's have a ceasefire. And this war, this Israeli regime war, was supposed to be about the Iranian nuclear program. So from now on, when Iran hammers Tel Aviv and hammers Haifa and other cities, people will be asking themselves, why are our lives being destroyed? And that is going to make things more difficult for Netanyahu. Second, you know, we can't take anything that the Americans say seriously. Nothing, really, absolutely nothing, especially with Trump. Trump says he's destroyed everything. I'm sure he has no idea what's under the ground right now in Iran. But also, that's exactly what they were saying about Yemen. Remember, during the war in Yemen, they were destroying it. And their capabilities were being degraded. And remember that signal group where they said the chief rocket guy, they didn't even know his name. He went into a building to see his girlfriend, and we destroyed the building. And they all had, you know, they did a thumbs up, these American leaders. And it turned out they didn't kill anyone who was senior in Ansarullah. So they just slaughtered everyone in a regular apartment building, as the Israelis did on the first night in Tehran. That's the American way. That's how they do it. They just slaughter people. But they had no impact. They couldn't kill a single senior official in Yemen, and they couldn't degrade their military capabilities. And they were using bunker busters. They were using B-2s. They were using B-52s. They failed. So why should we believe the American narrative? In addition to that, I would say that Iran's nuclear program is an intellectual endeavor. These scientists will be able to continue with the program whether the Americans like it or not. It's not hugely expensive. And now they have the scientific uh, capabilities and the knowledge that they've accumulated over decades. And in future, if necessary, they'll build their installations without telling the International Atomic Energy Agency or the NPT. But I still don't believe that the Americans did any real damage. I'm not there. I can't see down there. But from what I've heard, it doesn't seem like they've been able to do what they intended to do. But also, a lot of the narrative that we're seeing today is obviously false. Let me give you one example. It was said just today in one of the press conferences that the Iranians had no idea that the attack was coming, right? And that they were completely caught off guard. Well, I'm an ordinary Iranian. I'm not in the government and I'm not in the military. Last night, I was on 3 X spaces at midnight, 11 p.m., 12 p.m., 12:30, around then. They're all there. And I said on all 3 that an attack was imminent in the coming hours. So I knew, and they think that the Iranian leaders and the Iranian military didn't know. This is all just a narrative because they want to convince the American people that they're tough, because that's how the regime in Washington is. They love bombing, they love killing. Remember when Trump was elected first time round and he was a Russian stooge and he was Putin's poodle or whatever? And then as soon as he launched those missiles against Syria, everyone supported him. All of the Trump haters backed him and they say he's finally become the president. And so among American elites, death, murder, and destruction is what brings you credibility. But I think that the United States is changing, and the poverty that has been brought about and the divisions inside the United States are going to make it impossible for them to convince the American people in the long run that this round of death and destruction and war is going to lead them to great glory. In fact, I think when the Iranians retaliate, it's going to show that they are impotent, because the Iranians are going to retaliate. There's no doubt about that. The Iranians are going to harm the United States. They're going to make them regret it. And then the Americans are going to have to make a decision. Do they want to do it again? And I should point out that the Israeli regime is already losing the war against Iran, despite this sudden attack. The Israelis, if they were doing if they're doing well, then they wouldn't be begging the Americans to get involved in the war. So the Americans came in to help their genocidal allies, and these European regimes are all supporting them because they're all out there to support Netanyahu, their ally. The German chancellor, the British prime minister, they've been supporting the genocide in Gaza, the Holocaust in Gaza for 21 months. So obviously, they're going to do whatever they can to help the Israeli regime. But if the Israeli regime was doing so well against Iran, then there would have been no need for the Americans to carry out this foolish act. Because what the Americans have done is that they've isolated themselves across the world. In the West, people may, or at least a segment of these Western societies, people may be proud that they've been able to bomb another country, because a lot of ordinary ignorant Americans, they do think that way. I don't believe they're the majority, But these Christian Zionists and these fanatics, these cult members, they do think that way. But they're the ones who think Christ supports, or they claim that Christ supports genocide. So they're not exactly sane or normal. But in any case, all of this is not being done to help Netanyahu, so that he can continue his genocide. If this damage that they've done to themselves across the globe is very costly, and it just shows how desperate the Israeli regime is, that they were convinced to pay this price, to be seen as an aggressor, to be seen as carrying out an unprovoked act of war. And this not only harms them politically across the world, but it harms them in our region even more so, because people across in this region are outraged at what's going on. They see what's going on in Gaza every day. It's a part of our daily lives. It's not far away. It's not in a different part of the world. So I personally think that this narrative building is basically to strengthen the base in the United States, and Democrats, the elites, since they're warmongers and Zionists too, they are most of them are happy to go along with it. But I think in the long run, this is going to hurt Trump more at home than help him. And internationally, it is definitely going to hurt the United States in a big way.
Yeah, we just had Ali Abunimah of Electronic Intifada join us here. Ali, thanks so much for coming on. Please, your comments on the U.S.'s bombing of Iran and what your impressions are after this historic escalation.
Good morning, Danny. Good afternoon, Dr. Marandi. It's good to see you again, although I wish it wasn't in the context of war. Well, it's now late afternoon here. I'm in Jordan, and this morning, very early, I woke up to the news that Trump had ordered the bombing of Iran, and there was a lot of triumphalism with the initial statements from the US indicating that this was a great triumph and warning Iran not to retaliate in any way. And as we were sitting down to have our morning coffee, the air raid sirens started to sound here in Jordan. And as has now become a ritual, I went up to the roof and I observed the biggest and most prolonged barrage of Iranian missiles heading towards occupied Palestine that I have seen since True Promise 2 on October 1st of last year. I counted with the naked eye 19 missiles coming down towards the Tel Aviv area. From where I'm located, that's what I can see. I can't necessarily see missiles heading towards the southern part of Palestine or towards the very far parts if they're coming over Syria or the Golan Heights, but that's what I saw. It was sustained. It was there were very few interceptors at the beginning of Israel's war. We would see a lot more interceptors go up. There were far fewer this time. And then by the time the all clear sounded and I went downstairs, we were already seeing on Al Jazeera and on Twitter the devastation which these missiles had caused in different parts of Palestine, from Haifa to Tel Aviv and its suburbs. And it's notable that we're only seeing a small part because the censorship is so strict in Israel. We never see any satellite images of Israeli air bases or strategic sites. It was striking to me that within hours, the Associated Press was publishing what they say are satellite pictures of the nuclear sites in Iran that were bombed. Where are the satellite images? Why is the Associated Press not publishing satellite images of the Nevatim Air Base or the Palmachim Air Base or the Weizmann Institute or the Mossad headquarters, or even, the U.S. media, as I reported and wrote for the Electronic Intifada the other day, Iran attacked this big IDF cyber warfare base in Beersheba, and all of the Western and Israeli media were calling it residential apartment buildings. So the censorship is very strict. The missiles today, apparently some landed in an area south of Tel Aviv called Nest Ziona, which is the location of the very top secret Israel Institute of Biological Research, which is thought to be a biological weapons research facility. And there were claims, I saw claims from some people saying that was a target. But of course, I can't verify that. What I can say is that that's a very secret site and you can't get information about it. And the Western media aren't giving it to us. So that's what, that's how the day has gone. And I would say that the euphoria that the Americans and Israelis were feeling late last night or early this morning evaporated pretty quickly after those Iranian strikes. The question is what happens next. And I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Marandi's comments earlier in this program. I will definitely be going back to listen to the whole stream afterwards. But, there is some commentary, and I had this sense, about, well, if you're looking at the world from Iran's perspective, where would the best response be? And what I've heard a lot of people saying is keep the focus on Palestine. But of course, those are decisions that the Iranians will make based on their calculations. But, for example, just shortly after that attack, Nasser Qandil, who's a very well-known commentator in Lebanon, very close to the resistance, he's one of the many sources I listen to every day, made that point that that's what a lot of people in the region are saying, that would, from their perspective, maximize the impact while minimizing or making it politically even more costly for the United States to engage in any kind of sustained campaign against Iran, because as we know, this war or this attack is extremely unpopular. There are majorities. We saw that YouGov poll a week or so ago showing that only a tiny number of Americans want the United States to get involved in a war with Iran. So analysts in the region are looking at this from the perspective of what maintains the maximum legitimacy of Iran's response to the unprovoked aggression that it is facing, while minimizing the pretext or opportunity for the United States to engage in any kind of strategic bombing campaign of Iran, and keeping the U.S. home front split about this, in the sense that people wouldn't see any Iranian response as or any further American bombing as a response to an Iranian quote-unquote attack on direct U.S. interests. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but I'm just reflecting some of the discussion we're seeing now in the region. And I will just say one more thing, which is that it's hard to tell. Of course, you can't trust anything the Trump administration says. They lie. Everything that comes out of their mouths is a lie. When they were going to negotiations with Iran, that was a lie, and that was a cover for the U.S. aggression that was being planned with their assistance, in which Donald Trump boasted they knew about. When Donald Trump said he was going to decide within 2 weeks whether or not to attack, giving the sense that he was giving a chance for some kind of diplomacy. That was clearly a lie, because they were already planning. And in fact, I saw a report this morning that this US attack had been in the planning for months, the US attack on Iran. So that was another lie. Now they say they're not interested in a prolonged war or a regime change in Iran. What we have to assume that that's a lie, and they will seize any opportunity they can to escalate their attacks on Iran. That said, there is an argument to be made that they had started to realize, and I think we discussed this last time, the difficulty of attacking Iran, and the fact that the Israeli shock and awe campaign, as impressive as it seemed on the first day or the second day on June 13th, really failed to bring about the kind of collapse in the regime or the collapse in Iran's government system or military command system that Israel had hoped. It didn't produce any kind of uprising that they might have hoped, with Iranians coming out to cheer on the Israeli bombing and demand that the Islamic Republic be overthrown. None of that happened. Instead, what we've seen is a rallying around the flag effect in Iran, where even people who are in opposition to the government are saying, well, our country is under attack, so we stand together. And that's quite understandable. And in Israel, we're seeing these bizarre scenes where instead of coming together, Israelis are fighting each other over who gets to be in a bomb shelter. They're blaming each other. They're attacking each other. So Israel doesn't seem to be faring so well in this. And yes, the numbers, we do not hear this at all in the Western media, but the number of Iranians who have been murdered in this unprovoked attack now, close to 900. This is a massacre. Israel is doing to Iran what it continues to do to Palestinians in Gaza, murdering Iranian civilians, murdering them in their homes. As usual, this isn't an Israeli campaign primarily targeted at military assets. It's targeted at the same Iranian people that Benjamin Netanyahu claims he's not at war against. So, having said all that, it does seem to me that Israel is in real trouble, and trouble entirely of its own making. And the Israeli regime that caused this should, in the view of everyone I'm hearing, continue to pay a price for that.
Yeah, Professor Marandi, now I wanted to get your comment on the statements made following this attack. So Donald Trump not only said that this was magnificent, but he also said that more are coming if Iran doesn't essentially submit to quote unquote peace or capitulate. Pete Hegseth repeated that after their briefing shortly after the strikes. What do you make of this, given that the United States is claiming that this is the big victory that they saw, yet they are also claiming that they want to pursue more war if things don't work out? It's quite the contradiction. What's your comments on this?
It is, isn't it? But I think the problem is that the longer this confrontation lasts, the more problems the United States government will have at home. And the Trump regime will be more in trouble with his base, because if this is some sort of absolute victory, when the Iranian response comes, they will say, well, then it wasn't an absolute victory. And then if the Americans attack again, then people will start saying, this is exactly what you promised not to do. Although he's already violated and he's already torn up all the, and got, he's ignored the promises that he's made to his base and the American people. But if this continues, it is going to make it much more difficult for him. I think that the United States really is in a big mess with regards to Iran. And I think it's because of their ignorance. It's a very ignorant government. The US political establishment is very ignorant. The Israelis are very ignorant. US think tankers are very ignorant. They said that all you have to do is push Iran and it'll collapse. On Friday, we saw across the country, under the threat of airstrikes and missiles and drones, we saw Iranians across the country, and this people can go and view it online. Massive crowds across the country. People came to the city under the threat of death and voiced support for Iran's resistance. This is not a weak state. This is no pushover government. The Islamic Republic of Iran is powerful. It has always been powerful. It has always enjoyed a large degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the public. But now they've united Iran like it's never been united before, except for during the period when Saddam Hussein, with the support of the United States and the Soviet Union, invaded Iran in the 1980s. During that period of time, we saw the same sort of gathering of people and the same sort of unity that we see today. The Israeli regime, true, as Ali pointed out, they carried out a sudden attack. They tried to glamorize it in the West. Glamorizing murder is what Western media does usually, for two reasons. One is they wanted to whitewash the Israeli regime for the crimes that it is now, as we speak, carrying out in Gaza. And today there was another massacre, a huge massacre of children being slaughtered every day, they want that to disappear. And then they want to, by demonizing Iran day and night, over the past week, the mass media, the corporate media, the legacy media, they want to distract attention away from that, and also to whitewash the Israeli regime and say the Israeli regime is doing a service to the world by attacking Iran. So corporate media is the same. I mean, it's a tool. They've exposed themselves during this Holocaust. And we saw how it's no difference. There's no difference between CNN and Fox News. There's no difference between the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Times of London or the Guardian or France 24 and Deutsche Welle. They're all the same. They're all the same. The narrative, the way in which they construct their narratives may be different, but the underlying objective is the same. So they demonized Iran in order to prepare the grounds for war. And so, by the way, did the head of the IAEA and the Board of Governors. We have to keep in mind that the IAEA is a Western-bound political body. It is controlled by the West, like all international institutions created after the Second World War. They have the majority. The West has the majority there. So they try to demonize Iran to prepare the grounds for an attack. The media prepared the grounds for the attack. Why? They all wanted to save Israel. They wanted to whitewash the Israeli regime and to save the regime. This is not about Iran's nuclear program. That's just an excuse, whether it's the nuclear program, whether it's human rights, whether it's animal rights, whether it's terrorism or whatever it is they say. These are all just tools and means for them to corner Iran, to hurt Iran, to help the Israeli regime. Because the Israeli regime must rule supreme in West Asia and North Africa. But as I was saying, Iranians are united today. It's always been strong. As I said, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had a high degree of legitimacy. And people what the West has also done is that they've destroyed the worldview of the liberal elites in Iran. They've crushed it. Because in the past, these people used to think that, well, maybe if we try to negotiate, or it's our fault, we should negotiate, and then if we negotiate with them in good faith, then things will sort themselves out. And we're the problem. We were negotiating, and they were plotting behind our backs. And then they attacked us. And then we continued to negotiate. As you saw, the foreign minister was in meeting the European three, the British, the French, and the Germans, and they were still conspiring behind Iran's back. These regimes are deceitful. They're dishonest. They cannot be trusted. The Israelis have killed. They bombed the um, Red Crescent building in Tehran. They bombed the hospital. They bombed an ambulance. They bombed families in their cars. Murder. In one case, they murdered a woman, the entire family, but one of those who was murdered. She was 8.5 months pregnant. You don't see any of this in the Western media. But when a missile strikes Tel Aviv, you'll see Western media, express deep concern about the injured, and they were really, they were terribly upset, or about a military hospital which they kept saying was struck, whereas it wasn't even struck. The missile hit next door. So their double standards is becoming clear to ordinary Iranians. Ordinary Iranians see these things. They're not stupid. And the liberal elites who thought differently and were brought up to think that the West is, they see the West through mainstream media. They see it through mainstream university textbooks that are translated into Persian. The social science textbook. Most of our social sciences and our humanities textbooks at university are translations of Western texts. So the more we study, the more Eurocentric and we become often. Yet all these readings and all these news programs and so on that they've been listening to all their lives have turned out to be nonsense. They see it on the ground here in Iran. The foreign minister was negotiating with Witkoff. On day one, Witkoff said, yeah, sure, we can have a deal. Iran can enrich at 3.67% for its nuclear in order to produce electricity. Then he flipped. Then it turns out since then, and perhaps even earlier, as Nima was alluding to because of the planning for the attack, from before the negotiations even began, it's quite possible that they were plotting to attack Iran, but they were pretending that they were serious. And also they think that, but the interesting thing is that they think Iran is naive. Iran was on alert when the Israelis attacked. And also, that general who said that the Iranian, no one knew but a few Americans that this attack was going to be launched, and the Iranians were caught unaware. Just last night at 12 p.m., I was on 3 different spaces, X spaces, within an hour and a half an hour for each, and in all of them, I said that an attack is imminent. I'm just an ordinary Iranian. So it's not as if the Americans they're just talking to their own public, trying to convince their public how strong they are and how masculine they are and how they can kill people at will. But in reality, what are they doing? The entire global South sees through this facade. And the Iranian people are more united than ever before. And those Iranians who are always pro-Western, they're seeing the reality. That this government that has been demonized by Persian media day and night, the Persian media in the West, because they have a huge media apparatus in Persian. There's nothing like it in the world. BBC Persian, Deutsche Welle Persian, Iran International, all these news channels, websites, these online armies that they have, they were all saying, they're constantly attacking Iran. And so a lot of these young Iranian liberals and older liberals who were always thinking negatively about Iran were saying, well, the Iranians were negotiating. The Iranians were talking, and then the Israelis struck. And then the Iranians were negotiating again when the Americans struck. Does that do the United States any good? I don't think so. But going back to what Ali says, I think the focus will remain on the Israeli regime, but I'm sure that the Iranians are going to retaliate anyway. I have no doubt that the Iranians are going to strike the United States. I don't know how, where, when, but But the Iranians are very careful. They calculate, they're not emotional, they don't just take decisions. Suddenly, if they wanted to make an emotional choice, they would have struck back last night. And we have to keep in mind that the Iranian ability to strike the Americans is far greater than its ability to harm the Israelis. This is something that ordinary people have to keep in mind. Iran is defeating the Israelis. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, the Americans and the Europeans wouldn't be so worried about the situation, and the Americans wouldn't have gotten involved. But Iran is still beating them. Yet, firing missiles at Israel and firing long-range drones at Israel is more difficult than firing short-range missiles and medium-range missiles and medium-range and short-range drones at Americans in the Persian Gulf region. Those missiles are much more mobile. Those missiles are much more accurate. And Iran has a lot more of those. It has tens of thousands of missiles to hit Israel with, and tens of thousands of drones. So imagine what they have in the Persian Gulf. They've been preparing for potential war with the United States since the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And even before that, but after that, they took it very seriously. So across the Persian Gulf, and that's why it's called the Persian Gulf, because they own one side of it. Across the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, you have Iranian underground bases everywhere with all these missiles and drones. And those missiles and drones reach the other side within minutes. You won't have people like Nima watching the missiles pass over and for them to take 15, 20, or whatever amount of time, minutes to get there. They'll be there immediately. They'll destroy everything. And what do we have on the other side of the Persian Gulf? We have glass palaces. All those regimes are complicit because they host those bases. Qatar pays for all the expenses in its bases, the American bases there. They pay for it. The Americans, whatever they do, is paid for by Qatar. They're complicit, and they've always been complicit. None of these family dictatorships, none of them are sincere allies of the Palestinian people. Qatar is home to CENTCOM. Turkey is a part of NATO. Turkey and Aliyev and Azerbaijan, as we speak, continue to transport oil to Israel. As cities close to the border of Turkey and the Republic of Azerbaijan are being bombed inside Iran, they're continuing to fund or to export oil to Netanyahu. As the genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza continues, they continue to support them. They're all more or less, complicit, and they're not sincere about the Palestinian cause. But these countries in the Persian Gulf, they're very vulnerable. They cannot defend themselves. If there's a war in the Persian Gulf, most of these families won't last a few hours, at most a few days. They're very lucky, a couple of weeks. It'll be over very quickly. And then imagine what happens to the global oil market. The Iranians are the side that are behaving responsibly. The Iranians don't want a war. The only people who want war are the Zionists, Netanyahu, the neocons, and their fanatical allies. They're Zionists too. Only these people want war. But if the regime in Washington, if the Trump regime continues down this road, that's what we're going to get. Iran, so it will retaliate. It will be proportionate. It will be a retaliation which deters further aggression, but they will retaliate. But the focus will continue to be on Palestine, and we saw that this morning. The Iranians taught Israel a good lesson today. They were unable to defend themselves. They're anti-missile, and the Iranians are, for the most part, using older missiles. Just this morning, they used a few, I don't know how many, a couple maybe, advanced missiles that they haven't used before.
Yeah, well, Ali, I know that you had some time constraints, so before we move on, I'd want to just ask what your situation is, if you wanted to stay or if you needed to go.
Yeah, I just want to, I can maybe make one more intervention and then I do need to go.
Sure.
I just want to sort of focus on, we're obviously concerned about what happened yesterday, what's happened since June 13, what happened this morning, what may happen in the immediate hours and days next. But I just kind of want to pan out and look at the longer term picture for Israel. No matter how this military confrontation plays out, it seems to me that by launching this attack against Iran, Israel, in a sense, has sealed its own fate, because what future is there for Israel in this region? I'm reading reports in the Israeli media this morning about how Israelis are flocking to Egypt. They're passing through the Taba crossing into Sinai in order to escape from the country. There's a report in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper today, about where they interview some of those people leaving, returning to the United States, some who have never been to the US, but they have relatives there, so they're leaving. They talked to one man who is returning to Russia. And also, apparently, many are leaving through Jordan because flights are still operating from Jordan to other parts of the world. So they're trying to get out. And the Israeli government, which is allowing limited operation of aviation to bring Israelis home, but not to allow them out. So the Israeli government has banned Israelis from leaving the country by air. They're allowed to leave through the land crossings, but they're not allowed to leave by air from Ben Gurion Airport, ostensibly for their own safety. But, Israelis who want to leave are making the choice that they would rather take the risk of flying out of Ben Gurion Airport to Larnaca in Cyprus or to Athens or to wherever they might go on from there, that would be much safer than staying in Israel as it's bombarded by missiles. And the Israeli government has even set up this so-called exceptions committee, so that if you're an Israeli who wants to leave the country, you have to apply to a special government committee who will decide whether you're worthy to leave the country, whether you have a good enough excuse to leave the country, whether it's medical or whatever. And so look at the irony here. For decades, we've been told this propaganda that Israel is necessary. It was necessary to ethnically cleanse and murder the Palestinians so that Jews could have this one safe spot on earth that they could escape to truly be safe, because they weren't safe anywhere else. And the reality is that Israel, thanks to the behavior of the Zionist regime, is the single most dangerous place on earth for Jews by far. And Jews in Israel who want safety are trying to get back to the United States, back to Russia, back to Europe, through Egypt, through Jordan, through these countries where we're told people are so hateful and hate Jews so much that Jews wouldn't even be safe there, notwithstanding the fact that their governments have treaties with Israel. But we're told that the people are so hostile, and yet still Israelis prefer to leave through Jordan and Egypt than to stay in the most dangerous place on earth for Jews. And if we go back to this Israeli military cyber park that was attacked by Israel, by Iran on Friday in Beersheba and Beersheba, this is a major Israeli military installation, cyber warfare installation, with major IDF cyber command structures there. But it was also intended as this sort of technology park to integrate the military with the high-tech industry and all the startups. In other words, using all these civilian companies as human shields for the Israeli military. That would be one way to put it, but also to encourage foreign companies to invest in Israel. So one of the companies that's there in that cyber park, and we all saw videos of fires raging near its building, is Microsoft, which, as we know, thanks to current and former workers at Microsoft, is deeply involved in the genocide. But other US companies, high-tech companies, also have offices there, including IBM, including Motorola, and a whole list of others. And so you have to ask, which company in its right mind is going to invest in Israel, looking at this picture, is going to put billions of dollars into Israel, into its high-tech industry, when Israel's own high-tech workers are leaving? In that Haaretz article this morning, one of the people they interviewed who was queuing up at the Egyptian border to get out of there as fast as he can was a high-tech worker. And he said, I can work remotely from anywhere. I don't need to be here under the missiles. And that's true. That's a calculation that other people will make too. Maersk, the Danish shipping giant that has been very complicit in the genocide, there's been a big Palestinian-led global campaign called Mask Off Maersk, focusing on how Maersk is helping Israel to bring in the weapons of genocide that it's using against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Well, Maersk just announced that it's suspended all calls for its ships into Haifa and other Israeli ports just because it's too dangerous. So, yes, probably at some point the ports will open up. Probably at some point the airport will open back up. Probably at some point some of those Israelis will feel safe enough to come back and spend some time in order to maintain their social security benefits and not be struck off the residence register. That's what a lot of them do. Even though they're living abroad, they come and go so that they can maintain their social benefits in Israel, by not being away for too long at a time. But when you look at the long term, who's going to invest in this dying maniacal project that is at war, that has launched aggressions against 5 neighboring countries simultaneously and is threatening more? I think we're witnessing this wild genocidal lashing out, this attack on Iran, this unhinged aggression is the death throes of this brutal settler project. It's coming to an end. And the pretense, of course, the Trump administration of the United States are what they are. But the Europeans have also, the European regimes which even pretended to be oppositional to Trump, and, we're so horrified by this ogre Donald Trump. Well, the reality is they all got in line behind Donald Trump. They were all thrilled. They couldn't conceal their glee at the Israeli and American attack on Iran. None of them condemned it. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, hasn't condemned it. He's supposed to, his job is to defend international law of the UN Charter, and he would not condemn this blatant aggression against Iran that is a gross violation of the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter. So all their masks are off. This pretense of this liberal world order built on international law, built on human rights, is crashing down. And the people who see it are not just the people in the global south, in the targeted countries, but in the United States, in Europe, the publics there all see it. It's standing naked. And so we're at a moment in history where the world is changing, and this change is ongoing. The old is dying, but the new is not yet born. That's definitely a phase we're in. And we all have to hope and work for that, despite the horrific suffering that these powers can inflict on people, that what is born is a better world, and one in which power is held by people in sovereign nations, in independent nations, and not by these empires that believe that they have a God-given right to rule the planet in their own interests. That world has to come to an end, and something more just and better has to be born out of this.
Ali, powerful. Thanks so much for coming on short notice. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and my best to you, and my best to Dr. Marandi, and I hope to see you again soon, Dr. Marandi.
Thank you, Annie. It's always great being with you, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. So in the last 20 minutes or so that we have, Professor Marandi, how about we get into more fully the potential Iranian response, because there's a lot of talk going on. Of course, we have already discussed how ineffectual these strikes potentially are. Of course, we're still waiting for a lot of verifications, but um, there's all kinds of indications that these strikes did not hit as hard as the United States made it out. And even the New York Times and other mainstream Western media are saying that the goals were not necessarily met. But still, there is going to be a response. Iran has promised this since before the attacks. And many have been wondering about the Strait of Hormuz, about the military assets in the region, about the various ways that Iran could respond. So, Professor Marandi, what are your impressions of this? How do you believe that Iran could respond from here and should respond from here?
I obviously don't have any insider information. And what I would say is that the Iranians are definitely right now making that decision as to how they should respond and how intense that response should be. Because ultimately, there are issues here. One is that Iran needs to create a deterrence. Iran needs to make the Americans understand that if they attack Iran, they have to pay a heavy price. So they have to make sure that they have that in mind and that the strike creates that deterrence. So that if the United States, in its stupidity, tries to strike Iran again, ordinary Americans at least would say, look, you're pushing this too far, even though it's already gone way too far. But to build the pressure. Second, though, Iran wants to make sure that the international community, the global south, its allies across the world, see it as the responsible actor. We don't want to destroy the global economy. The Zionists want to do that. Netanyahu wants to do that. The neocons want to do that. These people are willing to sacrifice the United States and Europe for the interests of the Israeli regime, for the interests of the Zionists. We saw that in Ukraine as well, how European elites sacrificed the interests of their own country for the United States. This is not something strange. So these people are bound to this lobby. They're bound to these wealthy elites. They will sacrifice their country if they're ordered to do so, if the expectation is for them to do that. But Iran wants the world to see that it is a responsible actor. And the world has changed. We are living in a very different world. Iran has always been the responsible actor. Iran, Danny, has always been the good guy. And the West, they've always been the bad guys. When I was young, I survived chemical weapons given to Saddam Hussein by the Westerners, especially the Germans. And now the German chancellor says Israel is doing our dirty work for us. Nothing has changed. This is how it's always been. But ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the US victory in Iraq, and when many people across the globe thought that there was only one ideology left, and that was liberal capitalism, resistance to a large degree collapsed. And it was just Iran and a couple of small countries that continued the resistance. And they were demonized, and the Western media was able to go far beyond its own borders in influencing the public. And people who in the past, in countries who traditionally were critical of the West, that resistance, that awareness melted away in the 1990s and at the beginning of this century. But we now see the world is reawakening due to its neoliberalism, neoliberal policies, because of its never-ending wars. it's becoming more vulnerable, and people are seeing the reality of the regime. They're seeing what the Zionist regime is today in a way which they've never seen before. Many of us who were more, let's say, or at least I consider myself to be more politically aware than some. Nowadays, of course, there's so many politically aware people that I'm lagging behind. But in the past, maybe I would have considered myself to be one of the more politically aware. In the past, it would be very difficult to convince many people of what really was going on in Palestine, including among some young Iranian liberals who were influenced by the West. That's all changed now. So people have woken up to the reality that it is Iran that's standing up for humanity. It is Iran that is standing up against genocide. It's Iran that's standing against ethno-supremacism, and Yemen, and ordinary people and groups. But these are the only two countries, and they've been paying the price, and they continue to pay the price. But now people are beginning to see this. And across the global south, the sympathy lies with Iran. And even in the West, people are beginning to see this. I can feel it in the way in which people interact with me. When I participate in shows like yours or in others, the interaction and the way in which they depict Iran and see Iran is very different today than it was a couple of years ago. So Iran has to build on this too. Iran wants to make sure that everyone in the global south, governments and the populations, see who is vicious, who is the monster, who is the child killer, who is the warmonger. So they want to, so the response will be firm, it will be painful, but it will be proportionate to achieve both these goals simultaneously. Now, what exactly will it be? I don't know. But then the Americans will have to make a decision, and that will be fateful. Because as I said, the Iranians are prepared for an all-out war. They've been preparing themselves for well over 2 decades. And the missiles and the drones that they have in stock and in their underground bases, there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of underground bases. When they're unleashed, everything changes. So the ability for Iran, as I said earlier, to strike at the United States is far greater than what we see with regards to Israel. It's much easier, and it will be much more devastating. And the U.S. and its proxies on the other side of the Persian Gulf, they are much more vulnerable. These are, as I said, glass palaces. So the question is not whether Iran is going to retaliate. Iran will retaliate, taking into account both issues that I pointed out. But the question is, what does the United States do after that? After that is where the fate of the global economy is determined. Does the United States do the stupid thing and back off, or back off? Does it do the stupid thing and attack, or does it back off? That, I think, is the real question. And Iran will continue to hammer the Israeli regime until the regime recognizes very clearly that it made a stupid mistake in initiating this war. Iran will continue to hammer it until it makes sure that the regime regrets this. And by that time, Danny, the regime will already be dead. Because after that, all of these colonizers, these child killers, these monsters who support the Holocaust in Gaza, all of them will see that they will always be vulnerable here. They have to go back home to be safe. And their homes are safe. But no one will forget what Zionists have done. And the Zionists, the harm that they've done to Jews is greater than what anyone else has ever done. Because all these crimes that they're carrying out against Palestinians, against Iran, against Lebanon, against Yemen, all of these crimes they're doing in the name of Jews. And Jews are saying, and so many Jews that you and I know are saying no. So Jews are awake. Young Jews are awake. You see young Americans of all walks, from all walks of life. That's the same. The same is true across Europe. And in the global South, it is far, far worse. The contempt that I'm hearing from my friends in China for the Israeli regime today is far worse than 2 weeks ago, because this was an unprovoked war. So they thought that they gained by this sudden attack. But in the long run, they hurt themselves even more. They would have been smarter not to carry out the attack. The advantages that they gained are far outweighed by the harm that they brought to themselves and the way in which they've exposed themselves once again.
Yeah, and speaking of response, Professor Marandi, as you said, Iran will continue to hammer the Israeli regime the same day that these strikes occur. These strikes happened by the United States very early morning, Iranian time, overnight, and it wasn't. It felt like minutes afterward that I was seeing the reports coming out of various media talking about how Iran was now launching missiles, and after wave number 20. Iran put out a statement saying that they haven't even used the most advanced, or really they're like most battle ready, most war ready missiles. So many people are saying, Professor Marandi, that perhaps Iran should keep its focus on Israel. And you're saying that's not only going to happen, but that is happening. And then you have Yemen saying that they've entered. You have Russia saying that there are multiple countries ready should Iran pull out of the NPT and pursue a nuclear path, which of course isn't clear that they're going to do either of those things to gain a weapon. But should they, there's multiple countries willing to help out in DPRK at the same thing. So as you said, there is definitely a mood shift. China condemned this, but your comments on this about Israel in particular, because the strikes in wave number 20 of Operation True Promise 3 were truly devastating. There's some estimations that in parts of Tel Aviv, entire neighborhoods and blocks were completely decimated. And that appears to me to be a response in and of itself.
Well, three things that I think are very important. One is that my friends in the Republic of Azerbaijan are saying that people are increasingly outraged that the regime, Aliyev, he is selling cheap oil to Israel, whereas the Israeli regime is bombing towns and cities right alongside his border in Iran. So not only has he been helping the regime for 21 months to carry out the genocide, but he's helping them effectively bomb cities very close to the border of the Republic of Azerbaijan. This is going to have consequences inside the country. But more important than that, the big question is what happens in Iraq when the conflict between the United States and Iran expands, if it expands, and if the United States is stupid enough to expand the conflict. The situation in Iraq will change. And the forces for change are there, and they are armed. They could go into Kuwait, where the United States has bases. They can take over US bases. They can cut off the oil. The United States doesn't give Iraq its money for the oil that it sells. I don't know if you know that, but they hold it in American banks since the time of Saddam Hussein. They can cut off all the oil and bring the United States to its knees. And then they can take Kuwait, which they believe is historically theirs, rightly or wrongly. That's another issue. But there are US bases there. Yemen, if there's a conflict in the Persian Gulf region, they'll take back their historic land from Saudi Arabia. So if the United States escalates, imagine what will happen in our region. The borders will change, regimes will collapse, and the United States will be expelled, and the global economy will collapse. But it's not just in our region. By destroying the UN Charter, and the UN Charter and all these international bodies that the West has created, they created for their own self-interest. They're all biased in their favor. By destroying them in their desperate attempt to maintain hegemony, they're going to create an environment where you could see the same sort of thing happening in other parts of the world. Countries that feel that their neighbors belong to them, they'll take them, especially when the collapse comes. If the collapse comes, if the United States expands the war, you can see this sort of thing happening across the world. So you'll have global economic collapse, you'll have conflicts in different parts of the world, but in any case, sticking to our region, the United States will lose everything. It will be the biggest loser. And when the Americans lose, that's the end of Israel, because Israel is completely bound to the United States, even though the Israeli regime is already destroyed. It is already dead. It may continue to exist for a few years, but it's already dead. People across the world despise it. The economy is in ruins. They failed on all the wars. Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Ansarullah and all these have weakened it, and now it's being hammered by the Iranians day and night. It's not a safe place for colonizers.
Professor Marandi, it was really great to have you on today. I really appreciate you giving your time. I know you have another appointment, so appreciate your time here, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Danny, and I hope everyone presses the like button because you really deserve it. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, Professor Marandi. I'll talk to you again soon.
Bye for now.
Okay, we have a really big show today, and I have another great panel to get to. So let me introduce them. Please do hit the like button as you all come on, continue to watch. First, we have Greg Stoker. He is host of State of Play on Minpress News. He's a former U.S. Army vet. He's a U.S. Army veteran. Greg, great to see you again.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me on. Wish it was under better circumstances, but here we go. Downhill with no brakes.
And then we have Charmaine Narwani, first time on the show. She is a columnist on The Cradle, a great publication everyone should follow. I'll put all that information in the video description afterward. Charmaine, thanks for joining.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Good to be here.
Yes. So let's get started. How about first you, Charmaine? And then Greg, I kind of want your take on the nuts and bolts of this operation. But Charmaine, based on the work at the Cradle right now and what you all are following, what would you say is the most critical aspect of the U.S.'s attack on Iran that people should know about and the consequences of it? Because a lot of people are talking about World War III. A lot of people talk about a long war. What is Iran's response? There's so many questions buzzing about this. In your assessment, what's the most critical aspect of this?
I think the U.S. has changed everything in this attack. I just tweeted that it's really the end of the rules-based international order as of early this morning, and international law is either going to be abandoned altogether or be pushed front and center, because this kind of rogue behavior cannot continue. Folks are looking for stability throughout the Persian Gulf. Even countries that have been adversarial in the recent past with Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Turkey even. We estimate at the Cradle, and we'll have some reports on this in the forthcoming week, is that they would rather see an Iranian victory than an Israeli victory, because an Israeli victory they presuppose means massive expansionism into Arab lands and territory in the Levant, and a whole lot of other things. So I do think this is not only the end of the U.S.-led rules-based international order, but importantly, and this is something we'll be discussing on the Cradle Zone podcast tomorrow, is that it really is the end. This strike on Iran's nuclear facilities really is the end of proxy wars, the era of proxy wars that, have basically been in effect since the Second World War, where you didn't, unless you could regime change a country, you didn't, the U.S. wouldn't attack directly. The U.S. has now attacked one of 3 countries that are setting the vision for a multipolar world, have very independent and very diverse foreign policy agendas, yet are strikingly harmonious in their view of international laws as something that should be, predominant in international affairs. Who, 3 countries, and I mean Iran, Russia, and China, who prefer to lead with soft power rather than hard power, and who are together constructing, the stage for a Eurasian century. So by not having, by removing its own proxy, Israel, in this and stepping in directly, the U.S. is now in competition, in a contest, in a fight, in a battle directly with, I don't want to say a peer power, because most people don't consider Iran that, but a peer-ish adversary. And that is what is startling. Even Ukraine, the Ukraine war is a proxy war, right? The moment the U.S. goes directly with Russia, we come out of that realm, and they have tried not to do that. Trump always viewed Iran as low-hanging fruit because it's a brown country, and that's his mentality, a shithole country. But he's made a huge mistake. We are now out of the proxy wars. This is a direct war with what I view as a pure competitor. If military men have an issue with that, I would argue that Iran's substantial military arsenal makes it a pure competitor to the United States even.
Well, Greg, I think that's a good segue into your assessment of the attack itself. I know that you've been following exactly what happened and your impressions, given your understanding of military affairs.
Well, one thing that I kind of want to drill down on everybody, because I've been following a lot of liberal media and how they're pinning this all on Trump. But the strike package itself and the joint air exercise that went into it was conducted first under Biden. Basically about a lot of defense planners in Washington, in the Pentagon, all they do is sit around day after day, come up with war games exercises for how this is going to go down. And, Trump was presented with a number of different strike options. He chose that one, but this one was constructed under the Biden administration. So there's generally no daylight between Democratic and Republican foreign policy. And I'm always frustrated by the American voters' inability to engage with conversations about imperialism and capitalism. But putting that all aside, it was hugely expensive. They launched out of Whitman Air Force Base in middle America, because obviously the bomber fleet out of Diego Garcia, our little airstrip in the Indian Ocean, was under heavy surveillance. So they did, kind of a deception operation with other B-2 bombers that flew west, and then they flew east, refueled twice en route. They dropped 14 massive ordnance penetrators on Iranian hard sides, still waiting for a battle of damage assessment. But even like Russian foreign ministers have come out and said their nuclear technicians, which were working at some of the plants, are unharmed. They at very least got their people out. This in some way was kind of like a telegraphed attack in a way, or at least they had advance warning. So look, the nuclear program's not going to be destroyed or dismantled. They can kill all the professors that they want to and bomb all these hard sites, but the knowledge is still there. And now, after Libya and after this Operation Midnight Hammer ridiculousness, you basically just de-incentivize everyone from not having a nuke. So I definitely do think this is going to escalate. The Iranian parliament has voted to reportedly shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So we're going to see some direct, which will drag in the U.S. Navy. Charmaine mentioned Iran's short-range ballistic missile arsenal, which actually does make it appear, at least regionally, with United States hard power. One of the concerns that we're looking at now, if the U.S. Navy gets involved, these short-range ballistic arsenal can mass fire, and like, can they get through the Navy's Aegis defense system? Well, looking how, you know, the integrated air defense network in Israel's working right now, probably. And if not, even if they don't target the ships, well, every U.S. base within the region can be targeted. And of course, they only have like a couple Patriot batteries guarding each one of them. And, you know, once those rounds are exhausted, you know, it takes like 30 minutes to reload them. You have to go get the ammo from somewhere else, load it up. It takes cranes. So, yeah, we saw that in during Operation, what was it? Martyr Soleimani during Trump's first presidency. That yes, bases are incredibly vulnerable, and they're actually not a strategic advantage to have this many assets in the region, given Iran's capabilities. It's actually a huge vulnerability. So we're just waiting. It seems like, based off some of the messaging coming out of the White House, that this might not be the last bombing operation. And now that it's happened, they might not even use stealth bombers now. They might just go bold-faced. I was thinking about like the 2003 Iraq war propaganda. They're not even bothering to lie to the UN Security Council or like gin up bloodlust in Congress. So no one really knows what it's going to, how this is going to go down, but the entire regional dynamics are about to shift. Like we're seeing hawkish Israeli think tank world say like, Pakistan's next. We need to disarm Pakistan. And of course they have their budding you know, relationship with an increasingly fascist India, racially fascist India. So yeah, this is definitely shifting things around. You've got a new 20-year security relationship between Russia. China's now going to get more involved. We're looking straight at Taiwan. This is literally insane. So we're just monitoring developments as they come. But this is an inflection point, and there's really no going back.
Mm. Yeah, well, Sharmi, you can follow up anywhere you want to go from there. You know, but there was reports that this was telegraphed to a significant degree, and many are now saying that this might have been public relations. But at the same time, the United States is saying that they are willing and ready, and Greg just mentioned, to continue this. And that means that this is, as you said, this is a war with Iran with significant consequences. So wherever you want to go.
Talking about the Biden administration having, you know, cooperated in these kind of scenarios. There was actually an Israeli war game with the Biden administration in 2024 on this exact scenario. They did a full war game on this exact scenario using bunker busters. I don't know what's come before me in your conversations. You know, of course, one interesting thing is that this is the first time the U.S. has ever used this particular bunker buster. So it was a show-off exercise. The fact that it claims it used 127 fighter jets to, you know, execute this operation. It's, I mean, you know, Iran is using cheaper missiles to do far greater damage than what we're seeing from the U.S. and its allies. The cost of war for the U.S. and Israel is much, much higher. I mean, the actual price of conducting warfare is much, much higher for that side. I don't think the Iranians are going to backtrack at all. In terms of a range of options for Iran, I do think the most obvious one, and I've been saying this since early this morning, and it is not what everyone's sort of parroting, but it is to take out, right? Iran always said, if we identify that the U.S. has used a particular military base to attack us from, we will target that base, no matter what country it's in. In this case, we don't have those answers quite yet. The Iranians say they do, but I also suspect that the most forward base that the U.S. is utilizing in this war, that is most crucial to the United States, is Israel, the entire country of Israel. And I suspect that what Iranians will do to punish the Americans, and will truly hurt them most, is go after possibly even the whole range of target banks that they planned out in Israel in this kind of eventuality. I mean, it's very reasonable, given Israel's inability to put up any serious air defenses against Iranian ballistic and hypersonic missiles, that Iran could in 24 hours take out every single military airstrip, hit every single military intelligence security command center, and go for infrastructure moves. You know, they've already crippled the refinery, the one refinery. They can take out Israel's last operating port. Israel gets over 80% of its imports via sea waterways, right? And the Yemenis, Ansarullah, crippled the port in the south, and Haifa is now inoperable, and so Ashdod is left. They can take out Israel's power grid. They can take out Israel's desalination plants that supply it with 40% of its water. There's so many things, and I think if Iran went for, you know, the whole hog, so to speak, it would be a visceral shock to the Americans. While they haven't struck an actual American target, they have struck the US's most valuable forward operating base in this entire region.
Yeah, and Greg, you know, some people have been mentioning, as Sharmeen was talking, I was thinking there's a lot of people, I've been getting messages, well, why didn't Iran operate its air defense systems as the United States was conducting this attack? What's your assessment of this, given what Sharmeen is saying? I mean, which I agree with. There's Iran has been showing very impressively what it can do to Israel and hasn't even exhausted its possibilities. But yet there are some who are very questioning, well, why didn't Iran respond with its air defenses to this attack on its nuclear sites?
Because they couldn't identify or get a target lock on the B-2 stealth bombers. They have a virtually undetectable radar signature, and the altitudes that they were flying at may have exceeded their altitude and capacity. So that's why they use the stealth bombers. But going forward, they might use more conventional things, more conventional aircraft if that requires. And in terms of the Iranian response, all they have to keep doing, and I hope they don't engage U.S. bases, all they have to keep doing is boiling the Israeli frog, right? Israel is just like an extension of U.S. empire to conduct adventurous wars and destabilization operations to reshape the region in ways that will allow, like, the Western hegemony to exploit people, resources, etc., strategic power. So that's the best response, and I think that's what we're looking at. One concern, and this is just breaking now, I'm like, as we're talking, I'm just like trying to assess all these news. J.D. Vance just said it's up to the Israelis to take out the Ayatollah. And I was on TRT World last week, and I was and the anchor challenged me. He's like, do you seriously think the Israelis are trying to assassinate him? Obviously. This is the next stage in their escalation, because the U.S. bombing campaign is not going to work. A U.S. ground operation would be absolutely insane. You know, Hindu Kush times 10, horrendous mountain warfare. They have the Basij. It's basically a garrison state. It's just completely impossible for reasons that we even talked about last year, Danny. So, yeah, I think we can expect them to try to assassinate him, take him out. Because, like, what else? They say they don't want a regime change, but every time the U.S. says they don't want a regime change, they want a regime change. So we're going to see this kind of de-escalation brinksmanship, all the while, you know, they want to do decapitation strikes. And we've seen throughout this drama over the past 2 years, the U.S. used diplomacy as deception, as a tool of political assassination. You had that with Ismail Haniyeh in Iran. We can even go back all the way to Trump's first presidency, luring Qasem Soleimani to Iraq to assassinate him. But also Nasrallah during the ceasefire attacks. You know, the U.S. envoy was running political cover, saying, like, hey, let's work something out. And it was all just to buy time in order to get an assassination operation in place. And then this whole nuclear deal, you know, a lot of the thoughts were that the U.S. was, you know, kind of going further than they'd like to in these nuclear talks in order to lull the Iranian state apparatus and military into a false sense of security. Whether or not that's true, it's definitely within the U.S.'s playbook. So basically, will the nuclear talks resume? I think, like, going forward, only a fool would trust U.S. diplomacy. So I think basically an escalation in violence is basically inevitable. It just which way it's going to go, it's anyone's guess.
Yeah, and Charmaine, some have argued that this attack is very provocative in nature from the United States, in the sense that um, uh, Iran is going to be compelled to respond, and we've laid out the options here. But then, what are the significant the consequences then? Because Greg said he hopes that U.S. bases aren't going to be targeted. Of course, you had Iranian television. You've had Iranian officials say that these bases are fair game given the violation of its sovereignty. But what would then be the consequences? Is the United States really goading Iran to engage in an all-out war? Because the consequences for all sides appear to be just immense if that were the case.
Again, the U.S. is playing from a very old playbook. It's not a playbook that is worth very much because, like I said, we've come out of by this strike that the U.S. did on Iran's nuclear facilities last night. We've exited the proxy war scenario. We've exited the regime war scenario. We've entered a pure adversary conflict or near pure adversary conflict scenario. This is extremely alarming for the Russians and the Chinese, and expected by the Iranians. The Russians and Chinese, now I do not think they will come to Iran's assistance in this war because Iran doesn't want that. It doesn't consider itself a weak little state. It has planned for this for over 40 years. The Iranians today used different kind of language. They said, now the war really starts, okay? Because this is the war they've expected for 40-something years, all right? A direct war, no more proxy wars. The other thing they've said today is we anticipate that this could last up to 6 months. That means Iran is staging this war. It knows every single feint and movement and action and posturing in the U.S. playbook, which is extremely outdated as of this morning. The Russians, the Chinese are not going to let this pass notice at the international level in various fora. And to be honest, if the IAEA don't play ball with the Russians and Chinese, or neither the UN Security Council, we are going to see an elevation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a defense and security organization, as well as the BRICS, which is more of an economic play, being thrust into the global conversation. The Russians are speaking a whole different language. Dmitry Medvedev, who was prior to Putin's recent presidencies, the president of Russia and is now the deputy chair of Russia's national security body, has said on social media today that is clarified that Iran's critical nuclear infrastructure looks to have been unaffected or sustained only minor damage. He says, outright that the future production of nuclear material will continue. And then he says this very, very strange thing, which is kind of what we heard from Pakistan right at the onset of Israel's attacks a week or so ago on Iran. He says, cryptically, a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. I mean, for starters, this is what was being suggested that Pakistan had offered Iran and then dismissed by the Pakistanis. But Pakistan is the push-pull kind of government. You have the pro-US stooges in there, and then you have like the military, the Pakistanis, we wrote about this week, really, truly are taken aback by this because they do believe they're next in Israel's sights because Netanyahu said so some years ago. But we can imagine Medvedev is also maybe talking about North Korea. And, for all we know, he could be talking about Russian and Chinese nuclear cover, because as many people have been gossiping about, I think the last week, is if Israel keeps taking these hits, they might come out with the Samson option, right? The use of nuclear warheads themselves against Iran, and the Russians and Chinese and the Pakistanis and other nuclear weapons countries will never want to see an undeclared nuclear rogue state use these weapons. And so that will be the end of Israel on so many levels. But I think this is a warning. Medvedev's statement says this is a warning to Israel, in effect, that, if not us, others may be providing Iran with nuclear cover. So don't even think of going there, because Iran can execute this war, I believe, because with its existing arsenal, if the Americans stay out of it. But even if the Americans get involved, don't forget, this is what the Iranians have been plotting for. This is what they've estimated. I don't believe they're going to go shut down the Strait of Hormuz tomorrow and strike U.S. bases in Gulf countries. Those kind of things are the old way of thinking. I think what they'll do first is take out the U.S.'s most beloved and important military asset in the region, which is Israel. And then the fallout will happen domestically in Israel, will happen domestically in the United States. If the U.S. wants, they want, the U.S. and Israel are seeking regime change in Iran, what we might actually see is not regime change in Iran, but regime change in Israel and in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Iran has options, I think, is one of the thorns in the side of the United States at the moment. And I wanted to ask you, Greg, we spoke a year ago and there was, the axis of resistance was really, I don't want to say on the rise, but it was fighting very hard in response to the genocide in Gaza. Now, the narrative at this moment is that the reason from the United States side, from the Israeli side, is this is all possible, this strike on Iran, because the axis of resistance has been defeated, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. But yet, it appears that Iran still, regardless of, and you can, of course, state your opinion on that, but regardless of what they are stating about Iran being on the ropes, this does not seem to be something that's going to come to a conclusion anytime soon. And I'm not getting the sense of the ingredients of a successful regime change operation. So, Greg, what is actually the state of this war of aggression on Iran that the United States and Israel are conducting?
I follow a lot of, hawkish accounts, and, I read a lot of think tanks pieces by like the Atlantic Council and stuff, and a lot of it's propaganda. But I'm just reminded about when I was in special operations in Afghanistan and had a top secret security clearance. I was doing like intelligence stuff. There is just kind of like this echo chamber of like hawkish groupthink that people are able to actually, like, in these defense circles, delude themselves completely. Because it's a self-reinforcing paradigm. And as Charmaine mentioned, it's an old playbook. Like, I remember reading in 2009, the Saban Center for Foreign Policy through the Brookings Institute, Haim Saban, put out 2009, Which Path to Persia? And it basically lays out every kind of operational template that they have tried over the past 2 years, obviously going back to 1979. But yeah, there's even one chapter called Leave It to Bibi, where the Israel strikes Iran on behalf of the U.S. But this is just old stuff, and it's no longer working. And U.S. foreign policy doesn't change. The way we do things, we basically just mobilize our hard power, and that hasn't been working. The maximum pressure campaign on Iran was ultimately not successful. The whole idea behind sanctions themselves is basically to destroy any sort of like middle income, working class conditions within a country, and in tandem with like CIA propaganda and regime change operations to have a quote unquote popular revolution and install, a government that's more favorable to the West. And that hasn't happened. The military option is completely insane. Even in the most hawkish circles, it's unimaginable. Iran is 5 times the size of Iraq, with way harder, more difficult terrain, 90 million people. You'd need the entire the entire active duty armed forces to just conduct security operations. So like that's not happening. And there's a lot of people floundering. There's a lot of people within the Trump administration. I've heard, I was just recently in Washington that basically disagree with this entire position. And we can explain like why they went ahead with it. But basically, you're getting frozen out. In order to maintain access to political power, everybody's towing the line, and there's no vision for what's going to happen. There's no vision of how to get out of this. And as we have lost all like soft power, our ability to co-opt rather than to coerce, like what's left? It's just coercion. And if we also can't isolate this from the main objective of, and this is reductive, but U.S. Strategic thinking, which doesn't change from administration to administration. This is like a lot of this has to do with China, right? Putting in a more anti-Chinese government, pro-West government would mess with China's Belt and Road Initiative, their global infrastructure plan, the digital Silk Road going through Iran, and because what do we do? In general terms, we isolate, choke out, strangle any sort of regional hegemon or competitor, whatever you want to see it. So this also has to do within the defense thinking about China and our geostrategic shift from CENTCOM to Indo-PACOM. So we're looking at like they wanted to create like an iron wall from like Korea to Okinawa to Taiwan. All in Iran would be a part of this in order to isolate and contain. It doesn't work. It didn't work in Russia, didn't work in Iran, but that's another piece of the thinking here. It's all connected to this. But it's an old playbook. And again, as we've mentioned here multiple times, it clearly doesn't work. Sanctions no longer are what they were in the 90s. Our power projection doesn't exist. It was largely broken by 20 years of self-destructive global war on terror. So, but again, the main concern here is, since we can no longer do anything except use violence and force, that's kind of what we're looking forward to. And I mentioned this back in November 2023 when the state policy of bombing hospitals started, and that was accepted. Like after that started happening, I was like, okay, now this is all going to like roll back, and now we have no rule or law of order. The curtains removed, all the stage furniture is gone, and now you just have what we've always been. Just the mask is off. Again, we don't even bother lying about it anymore. So, it's just I think it's going to get worse before it gets worse. Even the domestic situation at home and how people are responding to this is also interesting, maybe worth talking about.
Well, maybe in our final question, and of course you can add anything you'd like to this in your commentaries, but there is a lot of concern, even, because I am of the agreement that the United States is really out of options as an empire. It is in decline. Mm-hmm. We see this over and over again. However, sometimes the empire in decline still, even if it takes 15 years, can get maybe the results that it quote unquote wanted. And I'm thinking here the example of Syria. Now, there's a lot of concern among people in the audience about whether a long war that Iran is forced to engage in with the United States, Israel, and of course their allies, whether that will end up leading to a kind of serious situation in the end. So I'm curious about your thoughts on this as this escalates, regardless of whether there's steps back made by the United States. As both of you said, this is a point of no return. So you first, Charmaine.
Extensively from the ground, from the onset, I think the domestic situation was very different in Syria than in Iran. You did have a lot of people who were opposed to the government. It was a playbook time. It was a perfect U.S. playbook opportunity. They'd been working in the years prior to the Syrian conflict to create divisions among segments of the populations, between sects, between religions, between urban and rural, socioeconomic divisions, etc., so that when the time was right, they would strike. It was a regime change playbook. Now, prior to June 13th, I can understand why the same people who've been using this playbook endlessly for decades thought that they could employ it in an Iran scenario. After June 13th, I think they're all seeing that this is no longer a usable playbook. One of Iran's advantages today that didn't exist 9 days ago is an almost unanimous support by 90 plus million people behind their armed forces. Okay, even people who don't care for the Islamic Republic's style of governance or have not voted in recent election cycles are 100% behind their armed forces. And this is such a unique situation for really any country. It's what governments hope to achieve in the months before a confrontation, to seed propaganda so effectively that they will have near 100% support from their own bases, right, for a military adventure. In Iran, the unthinkable has happened. Okay, so this is a huge advantage. Now, the Americans, I always talk about them as, you know, having the sledgehammer approach to everything. And it's so funny to me that they actually called this Operation Midnight Hammer, because it's all they have in their toolkit, you know. But Iran has, you know, a civilization of several thousand years, right? This stuff passes on the DNA somehow. But as the Americans have gotten, I think, more simplistic in their reaction to everything, the sledgehammer approach or the machine gun approach, the Iranians have spun out, you know, many scenarios. They're war gaming, but they're also diplomacy gaming, you know. And one of the sort of unlikely things that could really switch things up is, you know, Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, has just headed today to Moscow to meet with Putin directly. And I think what will be included in those discussions, because to be honest, Putin's not going to offer him military stuff. It's not the right guy. You know, if the Russians were going to do something like that, it would happen through other channels. Araghchi is there because he was the point person on the negotiations going on, you know, the fake negotiations that the U.S. had put into play. Now, what Putin might offer, and he's talked about this, is, of course, building out half a dozen or more nuclear facilities in Iran in which uranium would be enriched but would be under sort of Russian control, right? And the Iranians have now pitched for a while the idea of a consortium of Persian Gulf states who want nuclear energy and access to it, where they would, all of them, anyone who wanted to set up a nuclear reactor and be part of this consortium could do so, and they would share their enriched uranium with each other, right? And so we might suddenly see that not only has Trump ruined any chance of a nuclear agreement, but there is no nuclear agreement necessary anymore, because the littoral states of the Persian Gulf, you know, plus a major global power who acts as power broker, much like only the Chinese were able to do with the Saudis and Iranians, is going to step in and make a nuclear deal that's okay for all the participants, correct? There's no more NPT discussions. IAEA doesn't need oversight over that. You know, the UN becomes absolutely useless and pointless as a battering ram against Iran. And importantly, you would then have U.S. allied states and proxy states in this region, right, the Arab Persian Gulf states, participating in this endeavor with Iran, because for sure, the Arab Gulf states are super mad. You know, when Trump went in his first administration to the Gulf, the language against Iran was extremely bellicose. Like, you know, Iran's an adversary, Iran's terrible, Iran's, you know, the cause of all ills. In his recent visit, in his second administration visit to the Persian Gulf states, Iran was not mentioned. Okay, because the Gulf states, in their sort of like, you know, the the pre-interviews they do before a state visit by a U.S. president, understood that the Gulf was not interested in taking a whack at Iran. And we're in fact talking to Trump about, like, let's not start anything in this region. Let's try to end Gaza so this doesn't escalate. And on the basis of that and some other promises, agreed to part with several $1 trillion of their, of their money. Obviously not immediately, but over time, in order to make sure Trump followed through. And that didn't happen. Trump, it was a barefaced lie to them. So they're not happy at all with the state of affairs. And frankly, if oil prices go up, they're going to make hay with that. And I do think every country in this world, it's not just the Gulf countries, but every country in this world watching Israel and the U.S. act with impunity and violation of international law, subverting all, acceptable state behavior, are understanding that the U.S. is not a trustworthy partner in anything, and the Russians clearly are. What the Russians say, they deliver. The Russians don't overpromise. Neither do the Chinese. Neither do the Iranians. The Americans scream regime change. We're going to annihilate this and that. They can never deliver on their promises. There is a quantum shift in thinking that is taking place, that did start taking place 9 days ago, and started shifting, much more accelerating in its shift as of early this morning.
Yeah, Greg, your final thoughts as we close here.
I don't know. We covered a wide range of topics. It's pretty good. I just want to say it's hard to overstate the damage that will be done to the Zionist project if this war ends without ending or cowing the Iranian regime. Like, it's the beginning of the end. The thing that has kept Israel safe and allowed it to act both militarily and politically with impunity, aside from obviously being supported by the U.S. empire, is this idea of their deterrence capacity. The idea that their military was the lion of the Middle East. The Mossad it knows all, sees all. But yeah, I think that's gone, and there's a gag order on like the battle damage sites. There's a gag order on how many people are fleeing the country, and people are finally saying yes to the cousin with a job for them in London or New York City. And this trickle could become a rush for the exits as demographic trend against them, and people feel more vulnerable. I think we've passed a point of no return where the unraveling is inevitable at that point. First Israel, and then the United States.
Can I say one thing, Danny? Just because you had talked about Iran's so-called proxies, its allies in this region, the resistance axis, are they doing this because they think Iran's weakened? I just want to make the point that, again, to what Greg said, Iran's geography is massive. I think it's something like 1.6 million squared kilometers or kilometers squared, and Israel's narrowest diagonal line across the state is something like 17 kilometers. Iran sought to project strategic depth away from its borders because the last war it had was with a border state. So it needed to establish good trade relations, economic relations, diplomatic relations with all the countries around it, right? And so obviously after the Islamic Revolution, which is when the Iran-Iraq War started, it did a lot to buoy similar thinking groups and non-state actors throughout the region. But Iran never, ever calculated that when it would fight the war it was preparing to, right, the peer competitor war, that it would be relying on Hezbollah or Hamas or the Syrian state or the Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq. Never for a second. Those were partners in providing Iran strategic depth. This is something that all governments and all countries seek. So the Israelis and Iranians miscalculated, thinking Iran's weakened as a result of its axis weakening, or various actors in its axis, okay? Because Yemen certainly hasn't weakened. Yemen has trumped empire, to be honest. But Iran always intended to fight this war alone. And that's why I think today from Iran, from Tehran in the capital, you're hearing people say, now the war has started.
Right. And of course, just one final point. Iran is always their main adversary for, burying their nuclear program, hard sites underground, for obviously this is pre-Axis of Resistance, but one of the reasons that they got involved in the war in Iraq was because they knew that they were next. So they started funding, giving intelligence support to Shia militias to bog down the United States long enough. And this has always been like basically trying to sorry, I'm getting bombarded here, but it's all against the U.S. empire. So anyways, Israel's done. I definitely think so.
Well, I appreciate both of your time, Sharmeen Narwani, Greg Stoker. You can find The Cradle, where Sharmeen is a columnist of, in the video description. You can find Mint Press, where Greg Stoker does State of Play, in the video description. Be sure to support all independent media, Electronic Intifada, The Cradle, Mint Press News. They are absolutely vital to ensuring that we continue to be informed in what is really monopoly, global corporate media blackout gag order, as you put it, Greg, that exists around these issues, geopolitics, and so much more. So appreciate Sharmeen, appreciate your time, Greg, and we'll have to talk again very soon.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's be in touch. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. So just to close up here, I want to thank everyone for all these super chats. I'm going to go over them now, and then I'll give you a little bit of a hint about what might be coming up here. So please stick around. Thank you to Fatima's Fanto. We have mods here. I hope you all were able to keep up. I know that the last several streams have been pretty big. Thank you, Mo, for that super sticker. Thank you, Lisa Holt, for your kind words for all the guests here today. Thank you so much, Maureen, for this super sticker. Appreciate you becoming a member, PRG54. Thank you for this generous gift of 10 memberships. I. Very good, very good. Thank you so much, Jim, for this. Another super chat here from I. Appreciate that. Arjen Berg said, all power to the Iranian people for reclaiming their future from tyranny. Oppression will never have the last word. Appreciate that. Samuel, appreciate this. WF451, Pakistan is under total CIA control. Iran sold out. Turkey is a turncoat. Russia and China support Iran. Yeah, only that those are very astute observations. Where's Iran's last night's blatant vacillation to Iranian sovereignty and Iranian kiddo? Well, one could argue that Operation True Promise 3's response could be seen as a response, but I think more is coming. Beto Silatani, thank you so much for this. Shadow, appreciate just joining now. Can we get any video of citizens around our feeling now? Are they opposing and supporting their leader? I think you'll find in this show that we do go over this. And it appears that the Iranian people are definitely organized around their government at the moment. DH says empty unit. Hey, how is it going? Thank you so much for your contribution. And then safety and security on the go. And I'm Chinese in China. Muslims are good people. Christians, on the other hand, history have shown they violate and are uncivilized. My regards. Well, I would say that for Christians, those who practice Christian faith, I grew up as one. I always like to separate how the powers that be use religion in certain ways and those who may just be ordinary people who are practicing it, the institution versus the faith. I think that's a helpful thing to do when we are, especially in the West, when we are approaching the various problems and contradictions of any phenomenon. So with that said, everybody, I should be back soon. I don't know when. It's been quite a very busy time for me. I've been doing updates on Operation True Promise 3. I've been having streams since I've been returned back to a better internet state. But there should be streams coming up soon. I will announce those. And of course, I'll provide any updates as they come. Without further ado, everyone, take good care. I will be back with all of you soon. Bye-bye.